settlers were surrounded with a dense crop of timber. These trees had to be cut down to clear the land for farms and to supply the great demand for lumber. Water power was first harnessed in America by sawmill men. Shipbuilding became a leading industry, and American clipper ships transported the products of the colonists far and wide. The settlers had found their claims far from roads and towns unsuited for farming and heartbreaking when it came to building homes. The whole job of subduing a continent was tough for everyone who had anything to do with it, but they faced the conquest with determination. To the west was a vast public domain, rich in resources. The people were eager for homes. The natural thing to do was to make it possible for men of courage and ingenuity to settle the untamed territories and bring them into statehood. The drama of wresting a nation from a frontier of wilderness swept on. Heroic women with their children backed up their men every step of the way, and the frontier wheeled westward, over the Appalachians, across the plains, up the Rockies, and beyond. These were the men and women who first built America. Towns of wood sprang up as the pioneers pushed doggedly ever westward. Thousands of men were staking out claims and buying and selling farm and timber lands. There was speculation on every hand. Many suffered staggering losses, but the march of a nation across a continent continued, and destiny was fulfilled. Each of the millions of settlers needed lumber for his home, his furniture, his barns, plows, and fences. The eastern cities were being built largely of wood. Loggers in the forests of Michigan and Wisconsin and in the pine regions of the South worked from daylight till dark to meet the ever-increasing cry for more and more lumber. Ox teams and horses gave way to steam, and at a rapid rate, the cheapest lumber the world has ever known went into the building of homes, towns, cities, and industries. With the signing of the Homestead Act, 500 million acres of public land passed into private ownership, and more covered wagons fought their way westward. Public opinion demanded that the empire of the West be subdued and developed. Not only did the pioneers have to struggle against the forces of nature, but they were blocked at every step by hostile tribes of marauding Indians who were desperate in their efforts to stop the white man. Mile by mile, the frontier was beaten back, and the way cleared for the great procession of America on the move. The construction of railroads was imperative, requiring lumber by the trainload. There was no money in the federal treasury, and yet the assets of the growing republic must some way be unlocked. The railroads were in a bad way. They needed money for the extension of their lines. Their land, at that particular moment, was valuable to them only as it could be turned into cash. There were in those stirring times thrifty men of foresight and organizing ability who naturally thought they saw a chance to make some money by buying this land from the railroads. With millions of acres of idle public land, it was natural for President Lincoln to sign a bill providing for the encouragement of railroad construction with that land. But the chance these men had to take was full of risks. The forests might burn up. Mounting taxes might bankrupt them before there was a market for the lumber. Maybe, as their vision pierced the veil of the future, they caught a glimpse of their sons and grandsons, of you and me, at work, and the sons and grandsons of thousands of other men at work. And they took the risk. They bought this timber, the railroads extended their lines with the money, and the westward march of a nation proceeded. The voice of the people was calling for speed, more and more speed, in the conquest of the frontier. We must unlock the wealth of America. Give us lumber for the monumental task of bridging the continent. Clear the land for farms. In answer, the loggers cut ruthlessly and moved on, cut and moved again. Abandoned mills and towns, rusting rails, and equipment cast aside stand as mute evidence of the race of the loggers to satisfy the driving urge for penetrating a vast wilderness. Most people thought that the supply of trees was endless. Absorbed in opening up a rich domain that the husky young nation might grow to manhood, it was natural for them not to listen to the voices of a few men who thought that sometime the trees would all be cut down unless steps were taken to stem the tide. The small company of conservationists became sufficiently large so that during the administrations of President Harrison and Cleveland, 34 million acres of public land were set aside and called federal forest reserves. More areas were soon added. President Theodore Roosevelt further increased the area of these federal reserves to over 100 million acres. He did not believe that these forests should be locked up and not used at all, but that they should be wisely used for all the people. He changed the name of forest reserves to national forests and put them in charge of trained men to administer and protect them. He said, "The fundamental idea of forestry is the perpetuation of forest by use. Forest protection is not an end of itself. It is a means to increase and sustain the resources of our country and the industries which depend on them." Today, there are 172,600,000 acres in the national forests. The American people are in the lumber business in a big way. Having come down winding roads through cathedral aisles of majestic trees, we are appalled at the sight of the disfigured, bruised slopes of a recently logged area. The desolation looks so complete, we become indignant. It just does not seem right that such glorious mountain slopes should thus become scarred and barren. It is a shabby-looking sight. We loggers have lost a lot of time in getting it through our heads that timber is a crop. As the farmer reserves a portion of his grain crop for seed for the next crop, we too are leaving part of the trees as we harvest the timber to supply seed for the next crop. We have begun to leave seed areas, parent trees which will shed seeds which the wind will scatter. Trained foresters cooperate with the managers of the logging operations in making plans for leaving seed areas. We have not left enough, but we are leaving more each year. We are leaving some seed areas forever, at least as far as we men of today are concerned. We are leaving other strips of seed trees long enough to give them a chance to throw seed on the surrounding logged-off areas. We will go back and cut these later when their job of being the parents of the next forest is done. The hurrying tourist does not see the young seedlings springing up, often 50,000 to the acre, on land which has been logged and burned and which looks desperately bad. It takes several years, barring fires, for wind, rain, sun, and seed to cooperate in starting the new forest. But here they are, sturdy little firs and hemlocks, pushing their way upward through the brush and the fireweed. Another crop of timber to be harvested by our sons and our grandsons. While it would have been better if we'd learned our lesson 40 years ago, we believe that we have caught the situation in time. There need be no future period of timber famine between the cutting of the last old growth trees and the harvesting of the first new crop. Trees, like any other crop, grow to maturity and eventually decay and die. If they are not harvested in time, their usefulness to mankind is lost. Many of the trees in the Pacific Northwest were mature and ready for harvesting when the Pilgrims landed. These overripe trees, standing next to sound, mature trees, look no different, but when we cut them, we find decay. If you will watch closely as this particular overripe tree starts to fall, you will see how the left portion of the stump crumbles with decay. In many of these forests, the decay exceeds the growth, and the volume of good wood is rapidly decreasing. Much of the waste wood left on the ground is made up of trees which were overripe and decayed at the time of cutting. There is not enough good wood left in these pieces to make it economically possible to haul them to the mills. Our laboratories are continually experimenting to find new uses for this material, and the amount of wood wasted is decreasing. The first men who go into the forests before logging operations start are called cruisers, who accurately estimate the amount of lumber in the areas about to be logged. In this mountainous country, logging engineers require specialized technical knowledge to plan the location of the railroads so that all of the timber can be reached. With the aid of modern excavating machinery, large construction crews are continuously at work, extending the railroads into the timber ahead of the loggers. Many types of men, each skilled in his own work, are required for the successful handling of a large logging operation. The high climber probably has more nerve than any other man in the woods. When the timber is being cut down, a certain few trees are left as spar trees, which play an important part in logging. The high climber ascends to a height of often 200 feet into one of these trees and cuts off 75 feet or more of the top and sticks close while the tree sways, often 20 feet each way. Later, steel cables are fastened to the top to make the work of hauling the logs to the railroad tracks easier. The top is cut off as a safety measure for the men working below and to make the spar tree more wind resistant. To guide a 200-foot shaft, often weighing more than 40 tons, into the path chosen for it in rough country and dense timber requires a lot of experience. The fallers must be able to choose a place for the tree to land where there will be the least waste from breakage. By cutting all of these trees, with the exception of parent trees, which are left to start a vigorous young forest, national wealth is increased. Natural beauty is not overlooked. Continuous employment is provided, and adequate supplies of forest products are produced. Buckers cut the fallen trees into logs. They must know not only how to use their saws, but where to cut the trees so that the greatest amount of high-quality lumber will be produced. It just happens that this particular man is the world's champion fir tree bucker. After the work of the fallers and buckers is completed, the men of the logging crew put steam to work for the task of collecting the logs at the railroad track and loading them on cars for shipment to the mills. Choker setters and hook tenders fasten cables around the logs, and the engines, steam donkeys or skidders at the railroad tracks, reel in the cables to which the logs are attached. In some of the forests, there are cedar trees of the type and size suitable for telephone and power line poles, growing under the giant firs, hemlocks, and cedars. To prevent these smaller trees from being broken as the large trees come down, they are removed from the woods before the larger trees are cut. This practice reduces waste from breakage, and a larger portion of the forest crop is thus utilized. are the arteries of the logging operation. They branch out from one main line to reach all parts of the woods. Expert railroad men assemble the loaded cars into long trains, and with the aid of powerful locomotives, take the logs down steep grades and around sharp curves to the mill, which are often 40 miles away. State laws require that the debris left on the ground after logging be burned at specified times under closely controlled supervision. This makes it easier to prevent fires after the new crop of trees has started. The burning of these cut-over areas requires great care to prevent seed trees which have been left from being destroyed. Private owners and federal and state governments are spending millions of dollars annually to protect both the old and the new crops from fire. The number of fires caused by logging operations has been reduced to less than 10% of the total. And today, the forest-using public is the greatest fire hazard to these forests of the future. The public enjoys the privilege of hunting, fishing, berry picking, and camping in the forest areas, and they rightly should assume their share of the responsibility of protecting them from fire. Without their cooperation, there will be less hunting and fishing, and the forests, with all their benefits, will suffer. Lookouts on high points are maintained by private owners and by the government. A close watch is kept by men whose only job is to spot fires the moment they start, and to get firefighting equipment onto the fire with the greatest possible speed. Speeders bring the men down out of the woods to their waiting cars. We know today that it is natural for men to want steadier jobs, a higher annual wage, greater security against life's major risks, more home ownership, more time for the enjoyment of family life and for recreation, an absolutely free chance to join constructive organizations of their own choosing, better schools, and finer churches. There are towns in the Pacific Northwest where lumbering has been the backbone of the life of the community for many years. Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays find the men working their gardens, their ranches, and their small farms. Almost 3/4 of the homes in some of these towns are owned by the people who live in them. The men of yesterday and today, in woods, mills, and offices, have helped a very great deal to bring these desirable things to pass. We are not saying that these towns are the ultimate, the paradise of the loggers and the sawmill men, but perhaps they are along the great trail of life, where men will want to stop and pitch their tents for a long time, harvesting their timber as a crop, and really enjoy life every day. They are forerunners, maybe, of even better towns that will grow with the passing of the years, perpetuated through the sustained yield management of the forests around them. Loggers and sawmill men and office employees work hard when they work, but they also play hard when they play, especially when they're on a picnic. Most mills are located near the water. The buoyancy of water has no substitute for easing the task of sorting, transporting, or storing logs. A crew of trained mechanics and machinists keep the logging and construction machinery and the railroad equipment in good running order so that lost time from breakdowns is reduced to a minimum. Sort the logs. They separate them according to species, guiding each into a separate place: fir, hemlock, spruce, and cedar. Research in the utilization of wood has developed plywood, end-matched lumber, wood briquettes, lumber patches, fabricated beams and trusses, preservatives, improved finishes, fireproofing, and chemical pulping processes. All of these developments have resulted in less waste of the forest products, and by improving the quality and desirability of wood products, their use has been greatly extended. And now we arrive at the threshold of the mills. Here men begin the many different processes through which trees are put to shape them for the thousands of permanent uses which mankind has for wood. Time, unfortunately, does not permit us to go through all these interesting operations. Intricate machines in the hands of highly skilled men and women turn out fine, finished, matched lumber of all sizes and shapes. These products, which flow out of the finished durability to the life of America. The very existence of the men of yesterday depended upon their ability to win a tough struggle against the forces of nature. Our existence today depends upon our ability to cooperate with nature and with each other. 1,300,000 men and women are normally employed in the forest industry. They, together with their dependents, number close to 6 million people. A permanent long-range program is the objective of the vast majority of us in the forest industry. sawyer knows at a glance just how the logs should be cut to produce the greatest amount of high-grade lumber. With steam and electric power at his fingertips, he rolls and turns the big logs into position so that the saw cuts through them at exactly the right place. The trimmerman has a number of saws at his command. As an endless procession of boards passes before him, he cuts out the defective portions, and a higher grade of lumber is the result. It is natural for the men we have seen in woods and mills to have pretty solid ideas about industry. They cooperate with natural forces, and this leads them to think sanely about matters which affect their lives and the lives of their families. The vast majority of loggers and mill men, in common with most men everywhere, want peace in industry and quiet on the world front. Together with progressive modern management, they want to work out a continuing program of genuine benefit to themselves and therefore to their companies and their industries. Through the cooperation of men and management, certain forms of security are growing greater, while other forms are being built up through their cooperation with state and federal governments. The men and management of our own company are pretty generally agreed that our policy should be to operate the properties entrusted to our management in such a way as to provide a permanent and profitable investment for capital, to bring about continuous, profitable, and enjoyable employment for men, and to furnish society with uninterrupted supplies of forest products. In using the forest to the best advantage, most of the hemlock logs go to the pulp mills. These hemlock logs are broken down in the sawmills into pieces which can be handled conveniently. After the bark has been removed, the operators in the woodroom bore out the knots. The pieces then go through chipping machines, where they are cut into chips, each precisely the same length. They are then screened and poured into huge digesters, where they are cooked with acid and steam, which reduces them to pulp. This pulp, carried in water, is cleaned and screened. The final process of drying and pressing the pulp into sheets takes place. this form, it is shipped to many mills to be utilized in an ever-increasing number of ways. Timber is a crop. Seedlings increase in size. By using the forests in such a way that they will largely renew themselves, many of the benefits which President Theodore Roosevelt had in mind and which President Franklin Roosevelt has helped to realize can be enjoyed by an ever-increasing number of people. Fine stands of second growth begin to cover wide areas. The forests of the future develop, forests which will be harvested by the men of tomorrow. Warm currents of air draw copious water from the passing clouds. Great storage reservoirs of moisture are held back in the shape of eternal snow and ice on the summits and slopes of magnificent mountains. Nature has fashioned the Pacific Northwest to make it America's fastest-growing tree farm. Trees have sheltered, shaded, warmed, housed, and rested the souls of men since man was man. A tree which has its conception, its birth, and its growth to maturity in the natural environment of warm soil, rain from the passing cloud, the song of birds, and the roar of a waterfall, must inherently bear within itself, in whatever shape it may finally take, that indefinable something which is the embodiment of natural beauty, of satisfaction, of personality, which is peculiar to a tree. The setting aside by the people of adequate recreational areas amid the great trees, national parks that shall forever be a place of beauty and inspiration for the men and women of America, is a policy which appeals to all men of the forest industry. We enjoy these regions as much as anybody. And so, having spent a short time with trees and men, we feel the dynamic power of comradeship, that something among men which we call understanding. Once more, the setting sun colors the waters of Puget Sound. The mountains are aglow with a glory more than earthly, and tomorrow the men you have seen, and other men in the tomorrows to come, will go out to work among the trees you have seen, and other trees, and the conservation of men and the conservation of trees will not stop.